The argument had been brewing for months, maybe even years. It was the kind of slow, simmering tension that built up over time, chipping away at what once seemed unbreakable. But tonight, it finally reached its boiling point. You know what, Drew? Lorraine crossed her arms, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against her forearm. Her dark brown eyes, once filled with warmth, now held nothing but cold contempt. I could do better than you. I deserve better than you. Andrew Drew Miller stood still, absorbing her words like a slap across the face. He had expected the condescension, the passive-aggressive remarks. Those were nothing new. But this? This was different. This was final. For years, he had given her everything: stability, loyalty, a love that, while imperfect, had been unwavering. And yet none of it had ever been enough for her. Lorraine always wanted more status, more wealth, more excitement, and somewhere along the way, he had become just another item on the list of things she had outgrown. Drew let out a slow breath, nodding as if considering her words carefully. Then, with a calmness that seemed almost unnatural given the moment, he simply said, "Okay, try." Lauren blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I said, go ahead. If you think you can do better, then do it." His voice was steady, his expression unreadable. "You don't need to waste any more of your time here." She had expected resistance, anger, a desperate plea for her to stay, but instead she was met with something far worse: indifference. For the first time in years, Drew saw something flicker in her expression. Doubt? Uncertainty? It was gone as quickly as it came, replaced once again by her usual self-assured arrogance. "Fine," she said, lifting her chin defiantly. "I will." Drew didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just turned, walked to their bedroom, and began packing a bag. Lauren watched him from the doorway, arms still folded, but her confidence wavered slightly. "Where are you going?" "I'm giving you space," he said simply, zipping up his duffel bag. "Isn't that what you want?" She hesitated. I didn't say you had to leave." He met her gaze, and for the first time in a long time, she couldn't quite read him. "You're right," he said. "You didn't." He slung the bag over his shoulder, brushing past her as he made his way to the front door. "But I don't think I have any reason to stay." With that, he stepped out, closing the door behind him. Lorraine stood frozen, listening as his footsteps faded into the night. She had won. She had gotten what she wanted. So why did it feel like she had just lost everything? The night air was crisp as Drew stepped out onto the quiet street, the weight of his duffel bag feeling strangely liberating rather than burdensome. He had walked away without hesitation, without turning back. There was nothing left for him in that house, only memories of a love that had long since turned to obligation. He didn't go to a hotel. He didn't crash on a friend's couch. Instead, he went straight to his office. The sterile white glow of his desk lamp cast long shadows as he settled into his chair, exhaling slowly. His job had always been a source of stability, but tonight, it felt like something more. A foundation, a starting point. Lauren had always made him feel like he was standing still, like he wasn't enough. But what if she was wrong? Drew leaned forward, opening his laptop. For the first time in years, he wasn't working late out of necessity. He was working for himself. The evolution begins. The next morning, Drew didn't waste time grieving over the end of his marriage. He poured himself into his career. He reached out to colleagues he hadn't spoken to in years, started networking, attending industry events. His company had always valued him, but now he was making sure they saw just how valuable he was. With renewed determination, he took on bigger projects, negotiated better deals, and pushed himself harder than ever before. He wasn't just working, he was growing, evolving into the man he had once dreamed of being before he had settled into the role of the good husband. But success wasn't just about work. He started going to the gym again, rediscovering the strength and discipline he had once had. The first few sessions were brutal, his body protesting every weight, every sprint. But pain was temporary. Change demanded discomfort, and Drew welcomed it. At first, he worked out in silence, his mind replaying Lorraine's words like a broken record. "I can do better than you." But with each rep, each lap around the track, the words lost their power. His body changed. His mindset shifted. He wasn't working out because of her. He was working out for himself. Meanwhile, on the other side, Lauren had expected a different outcome. She had imagined a tearful phone call, an attempt at reconciliation, maybe even a dramatic grand gesture to win her back, but none of that came. Instead, she found herself alone in the house she had once shared with Drew. The spacious, modern kitchen felt emptier without the sound of him brewing his morning coffee. The bed felt colder without his steady warmth beside her. She had told herself that freedom would feel exhilarating, like stepping into a life of endless possibility, but instead it just felt quiet. She went on dates, plenty of them, handsome men in expensive suits, men who made grand promises and knew how to talk their way into her good graces. But none of them were Drew. One man showered her with gifts but barely listened when she spoke. Another made her laugh but had no ambition beyond his next drink. The excitement she had craved was fleeting, dissolving into the reality that the grass wasn't just not greener. It was artificial turf, and then came the financial strain. Drew had been the steady force keeping everything together, the silent architect of their comfortable life. Without him, reality hit hard. Rent, bills, luxuries she had taken for granted. Suddenly, they weren't so effortless. She told herself she still had time, she could find someone better, someone who could offer her the life she deserved. But deep down, a thought gnawed at her. What if I already had the best, and I let him go? A new chapter. Drew, on the other hand, was thriving. One evening, after a particularly productive meeting, he stopped by a coffee shop near his office. He had been so focused on work and self-improvement that he hadn't thought much about dating. But then he met her. Claire. She wasn't flashy like Loran, wasn't trying to prove anything. She was warm, intelligent, and had a quiet confidence that intrigued him. Their first conversation wasn't forced, wasn't a performance. It was easy, natural. For the first time in a long time, Drew found himself smiling. Not out of obligation, but because he wanted to. He had walked away from a life that had made him feel small, and in doing so, he had found something far greater, himself. Loran sat at the corner table of an upscale bar, swirling the remnants of her second martini as she glanced at her phone. No messages, no missed calls, no texts from Drew begging for another chance. It had been weeks now, maybe months. She had lost track. She had always assumed that if things ever got this bad, if she ever truly left, Drew would chase her. He was the type of man who didn't just let go of commitments. He had always been stable, reliable, there. But he wasn't anymore. Instead of the desperate, broken ex-husband she had expected, Drew was thriving. At first, she had caught glimpses of his progress through mutual acquaintances. A coworker of his had mentioned he was working late nights, taking on new leadership roles. Someone else offhandedly noted that he had been seen at the gym again, looking better than ever. Then came the social media updates. He had never been one for posting much, but now there were pictures of him at conferences, at high-extend restaurants, even laughing with people she didn't recognize. And then the final blow, a picture, just one. True. Standing on a rooftop patio, city lights glowing behind him, a drink in his hand. And beside him, a woman. Lauren gripped her phone tighter, staring at the image. The woman wasn't overly glamorous, but she had an effortless elegance, natural beauty, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. Her name was Claire. Loren had heard the name mentioned a few times by friends, but she had brushed it off, assuming it was nothing. But this picture... This picture said otherwise, and for the first time, a foreign emotion twisted in her stomach. Not just anger, not just regret, jealousy, the realization. That night, Loran found herself pacing her apartment. She had everything she had wanted. Freedom, the chance to explore, to find something better. But better had never come. The men she dated were charming, but none had been solid like Drew. They were exciting, but their excitement fizzled out after a few weeks. None of them made her feel safe. And now here she was, watching the man she had discarded become someone else's happiness. Was I wrong? The thought gnawed at her. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but the longer she sat with it, the more undeniable it became. She had thrown away a man who had never betrayed her, who had never let her down, and she had done it for... what? An illusion. A plan to fix it. Lauren wasn't the type to admit defeat easily. If she had made a mistake, she could fix it. She could remind Drew of what they had. She could show him that she was still the woman he had once loved. She picked up her phone, scrolling through their old texts, finding his number. Her fingers hovered over the call button, but then she hesitated. What would she even say? I miss you. I made a mistake. We can fix this. Wouldn't even care. Instead of calling, she started small. A text. Lauren, hey, I was just thinking about you. Hope you're doing well. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No response. The next day, she tried again. Lauren, it's been a while. Would love to catch up sometime. Still nothing. She hated this. She wasn't used to being ignored. Drew had always responded to her. Desperation crept in. If text wouldn't work, maybe something more direct would. Face to face. A week later, Loran found herself outside Drew's office. She had dressed carefully, nothing too obvious, but just enough to remind him of what he had once had. When she walked in, she was greeted by his assistant, who hesitated before speaking. Oh, Loran, I'll check if he's available. That hesitation stung. Had he told people about their breakup? Had he moved on so quickly that even his coworkers didn't see her as relevant anymore? After a few moments, the assistant returned, offering a polite but firm smile. I'm sorry, but Drew is in a meeting right now. I can let him know you stopped by. Lauren clenched her jaw. She had been dismissed. That had never happened before. Feeling a mix of humiliation and frustration, she turned and walked out. But she wasn't giving up. The final attempt. Lauren waited until she knew he would be home. Then, late one evening, she drove to his apartment, the one she had never seen before. She rang the doorbell, heart pounding. The door opened, and there he was. Drew looked different. He carried himself differently. He didn't look surprised to see her. If anything, he looked amused. Lorianne, he said simply. Her heart raced. Hey. Silence stretched between them. She swallowed hard, forcing a smile. I was just in the area and thought I'd stop by. Drew leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. In the area? Lauren faltered. I've been thinking about you. About us. Something flickered in his expression. Not longing, not regret, just pity. Lauren, he said, voice calm, there is no us anymore. Her throat tightened. But you said you could do better. His eyes met hers, unwavering. Did you? The question hit her like a punch to the gut. She had no answer. Drew didn't wait for one. Take care of yourself, Loren. And with that, he closed the door. She stood there, staring at the wood grain, realization crashing over her. It was over. Truly, finally, over. And for the first time in her life, she understood the weight of her own choices. Loren sat in her darkened apartment, the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. She scrolled mindlessly through old photos. Her and Drew at a vacation resort, laughing at a private dinner, standing side by side at a New Year's Eve party. They looked happy. Had they been happy? Or had she just convinced herself that something better was always waiting just beyond the horizon? But now the horizon was empty. Drew had closed the door, literally and figuratively. And worse, he had meant it. For the first time in a long time, Loran found herself truly alone. The weight of a choice. For weeks, she had believed she could fix this, that all it would take was a conversation, a reminder, a moment of vulnerability to bring Drew back. But that moment had passed, and she was left standing in the wreckage of her own making. Her phone vibrated on the coffee table, a message. Her heart leapt. Maybe it was Drew. But no, it was from Ryan, one of the men she had briefly dated. Ryan, hey beautiful, want to grab drinks tonight? Loran exhaled sharply, tossing the phone onto the couch. She had spent so much time chasing men like Ryan, shallow, charming, surface-level distractions, but now she couldn't stomach the thought of another empty conversation, another meaningless flirtation that would leave her feeling hollow the next morning. Ryan wasn't the answer. Neither was anyone else. Drew's new life. Meanwhile, Drew's world had expanded in ways he hadn't expected. At work, his confidence had grown. He had been promoted to a senior position, and now, instead of working behind the scenes, he was the one leading meetings, making decisions, shaping the future of his company. He had even started mentoring younger employees, something he never would have imagined himself doing before. And yet it felt right, like he was finally stepping into the man he was always meant to be. And then there was Claire. She had been a quiet, steady presence in his life. There was no whirlwind romance, no drama, no need to impress or perform. With Loran, he had always felt like he had to prove himself. With Claire, he just was. And it was enough. One evening, they sat across from each other at a rooftop restaurant, the city lights flickering below. Claire studied him, her eyes thoughtful. You seem lighter lately, she said, tilting her head, like you finally let go of something heavy. Drew considered her words. He hadn't just let go of Lauren. He had let go of who he was with her, the man who tolerated disrespect, the man who let someone else define his worth, the man who believed love meant proving himself over and over. That man was gone. Yeah, he admitted, a slow smile spreading across his lips. I think I have. Claire reached across the table, squeezing his hand. Good. Because you deserve better. For the first time in a long time, Drew truly believed it. Loran's reckoning. Loran wasn't ready to admit it yet, but deep down, she knew she had lost something irreplaceable. She had been so convinced that she could do better, that Drew was merely a stepping stone on her path to something greater. But what she had never considered was that Drew had always been the best thing in her life, and she had let him go. She avoided social media for weeks, unable to bear the thought of seeing more glimpses of his new life, of Claire. But she couldn't hide forever. One evening, she ran into an old acquaintance at a coffee shop. You look great, Loran, the woman said, stirring her latte. Have you seen Drew lately? I heard he's doing amazing at work. And Claire, she's wonderful. Loran forced a tight smile, nodding. Yeah, wonderful. The words tasted bitter. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the truth finally settled into her bones. Drew wasn't coming back, and she had no one to blame but herself. New beginnings. Acceptance wasn't easy. It came in waves. Some days, she was fine, distracted by work or mindless television. Other days, the regret hit her like a freight train, leaving her breathless. But there was no undoing the past. So she did the only thing left to do. She started over. It began with small things, cleaning out her closet, rearranging her apartment, throwing away old mementos that no longer served her. Then bigger things, taking a class, volunteering, going on solo trips to rediscover who she was. Without Drew, for the first time in her life, she wasn't looking for validation from a man. She wasn't chasing status, wealth, or the illusion of something better. She was just living. It wasn't easy, but maybe, just maybe, it was necessary. Meanwhile, Drew never looked back. He had no need to. Loran never reached out to Drew again. There were moments when she wanted to, times when the loneliness crept in, when the silence of her apartment became too deafening. She would pick up her phone, her fingers hovering over his name, but she never pressed send. Because what would she even say? There were no words that could undo what had already been done. Instead, she focused on rebuilding. It wasn't about finding someone new, not anymore. It was about finding herself, the person she had lost long before Drew had walked out that door. She spent months in self-reflection, analyzing the choices she had made, the mistakes she had refused to acknowledge. She had spent so long believing she was entitled to something better without ever defining what better truly meant. And now she understood. Better wasn't about wealth or status. It wasn't about the excitement of a new romance or the thrill of temporary attention. Better was stability, consistency, mutual respect, and she had thrown it all away. Drew's last goodbye. Drew had no anger left for Loran. If anything, he wished her well. He had moved on, not just in love, but in life. The man he was now would never have tolerated the way she treated him. Claire had shown him what a healthy, supportive relationship looked like. But more importantly, he had learned to value himself. One evening, while cleaning out his inbox, Drew came across an old email from Loran something she had sent years ago, back when their marriage was still intact. It was a simple message. I love you, Drew. I don't say it enough, but I do. Even when I'm difficult, even when I push you away, I love you. He stared at the words for a moment, feeling a pang of nostalgia, but it was distant now. Like looking at a life that no longer belonged to him. Without hesitation, he deleted the email. Some doors weren't meant to be reopened. Loran's final realization. One afternoon, months later, Loran found herself sitting alone at a quiet cafe. She had started journaling, something she had never done before. And as she flipped through her notes, she came across an entry she had written the day Drew walked away. He didn't fight for me. She had been so sure back then that his indifference meant he never truly loved her, but now she saw it differently. Drew had loved her. He had just loved himself more. And that was what she had never understood, that love wasn't about who would fight the hardest, who would chase the longest. Sometimes real love meant knowing when to let go. Lauren closed her journal, taking a deep breath. Drew was happy, and now it was time for her to find her own happiness, not in someone else, but in herself. She stood up, paid for her coffee, and stepped out into the sunlit street. The past was behind her, and for the first time, she was finally ready to move forward.